Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Masuk Report. As always, it is a pleasure to welcome our guest panelists. Mrs. Ann Spernell, a member of the Masuk World Language Department. Mr. Jeffrey Seymour, a member of the Masuk English Department. Senior Nick Davies, and Senior Katie Ryan. Our topic of concern for today revolves around 4 questions related to education in America. These questions will address matters related to the integration of technology in the learning process, whether or not it is best to introduce technology in the classroom at the youngest possible age, the idea that college should be attainable for all, and the consequence of embracing programs and standards that require teaching to a test. I am certain you would agree that much controversy revolves around these questions. But before we begin our discussion, allow me to remind you that this is an open roundtable, and our panelists are free to interject and respond to comments made by each other. We will open our discussion with a most interesting question which asks, how soon learning with the aid of technology is necessary? Some of you might be aware of a recent article published in the New York Times by Matt Richtel, in which he reviews how leading technocrats in Silicon Valley choose to send their children to the Waldorf School, a school that rejects the idea that you need technology in the lower grades. So, Mrs. Spernell, share your thoughts.
Having 2 young children myself, I find it very interesting with technology. I think social interaction is extremely important at the lower levels so children can communicate. However, I do feel that they need to learn the correct uses of technology so they are able to apply what they learn both in the classroom and outside the classroom when they go home.
How early should this be done? Their argument is that they want to learn to do their arithmetic, their writing, their reading, all within their own mental skills, as opposed to becoming attached to what we would call apps. Any response to that?
Again, I feel that there's a time and a place for technology, but I think foremost we need to have a teacher that is able to instruct the children on how to do the arithmetic first. With the literacy and everything there, they need to guide the students to succeed. However, apps, use apps sparingly. Social interaction is extremely important. I can't tell you how upset it makes me to learn that students aren't able to communicate with each other. However, they're texting each other rather than talking to each other. They could be right next to each other in the same house, and what are they doing? Texting. So I think we should limit the use of technology to, appropriate measures.
Unfortunately, many adults do the same thing.
Absolutely.
And the old adage is children learn what they see.
Right.
So what do you think, Katie?
I have to agree. I think that the use of apps can be good when it comes to learning to read, learning arithmetic, but I feel that as in the use of calculators, I feel they should be introduced later because it really impairs their learning in later years, especially in high school. The use of calculators, it really shouldn't be introduced until later in their learning. Arithmetic, really, it should be done by hand, I think.
What about our 2 gentlemen? Any comments?
I think what's important to note is that in this school that the New York Times article talks about, it's really, they only specify that it's in the lower grades. They talk about how they start off without this technology, and I think that's important because technology isn't necessarily a bad thing when you're using it to aid when you're trying to learn, but you don't want to have to rely on it. So I think after they pass through the grammar school, I'm sure then they will be introduced to technology and the right ways to use it. But I think it's important that it's only an aid for the learning. It's not actually their source of where they're learning and becoming who they are.
But as a result of your own experiences growing up in the Monroe school system, when you look about, do you see evidences that we are becoming too reliant?
Not necessarily. I also think that I grew up in kind of an interesting time because it's kind of during like this spark of technology, because when I was younger and going through the grammar school, I didn't have smartboards or anything we have now. So I was like, in a way, the perfect age for this. I had to grow up without really relying on technology, and then now that I'm at an older age and I know how to use technology, now I see the integration of smartboards in this classroom and everything, and I think that's I'd really benefited from that. But I think even though we have the technology now, I think kids that are still going through grammar school will have to go through like what I went through and not have that. Because I think that's what helped me.
So we embellish them with a little bit too much too soon?
Yeah.
What about you, Mr. Seymour?
I think, then Linda, what you just said, that when we get to high school, we should take it away. Because I think it becomes too much of a crutch. We've been talking about this in my English class about what Google does to us and how kids don't want to read. And the clearest indicator of success when you get to college is how well you read. So maybe when we get to high school, if we have kids who are completely bought up on technology, STEM now has the bring your own technology rule. They can bring whatever they want. Maybe we should start to wean the kids off of that stuff for at least part of high school to get them ready for what they have to do in college. I mean, you know from graduate school and from your upper level electives in college that if somebody says you have to do a literature search, you actually have to go and read things and read a lot of them. You can't fake it. And there are too many shortcuts that are involved in some of the technology we're teaching the kids. I mean, just run a project through turnitin.com and you see what the kids are up to. I think that there's a place for it, but I think we have to be pretty judicious about how we use it as we're getting these kids ready for college, or they're going to go to college and get the shock of their life.
One of the things I observe with my independent studies program is the students are more and more, if I can put it in these terms, impatient. They go to Google or something, and if it doesn't come up right away, they jump to another screen. And the whole idea that maybe you need to be a little pursuant, a little patient, and try to think more clearly. But the first thing they type in is they want the instant response. And that's something I found myself struggling a great deal with, particularly the last 2 years, as opposed to 3, 4, and 5 years ago. So I don't know. I think we have ourselves a consequential dilemma. Any final comment anyone would like to offer?
In response to that, I also think with technology, though, in a way we're set up to use it right now. So in a lot of classes, I have a large workload, and I don't think it would be necessarily as feasible if I didn't have a Google search bar that made it faster. So I think if there was an elimination of too much technology use, I think there would also have to be the teachers would have to understand that it might be a little slower of a process, because with Google it's a lot faster, but I also don't think I would be able to accomplish all my homework without those little helps that they provide.
But if you slow it down a little bit, do you think a little more thinking might occur?
Yeah, I think that would be a beneficial thing, but I also don't really necessarily know if it's possible, because
we've gone too far.
Yeah, we've gone too far. So I think we do have to take a step back, though.
When you think of your young children already engaged with this technology, what Nick has grown into is something they're growing up with.
Right.
So what do you look upon when you see the future there? Is it going to be even more overloaded and unbalanced toward the technology, or what?
I do think they're going to use technology more, and it's going to be a crutch for them to get through everything that they're going to do. So it frightens me, because they're going to know a lot more than I know about technology in a way. So that scares me. Even, looking at me growing up, I had nothing. Well, not nothing, but I didn't have any. We had VCR. That was it. I still have to help my parents with a VCR. What are my kids going to have to help me do when, I'm a grandparent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I always go back to this thought, and maybe someone has a reaction to it. Just because I know how to do something doesn't mean I understand it. And that's what I fear the most, is that we're going to become very efficient at knowing how to look something up, but we're not necessarily going to understand it. Knowing how to and knowing are two different things.
I tend to agree with you. I think that, getting back to what Nick said about people working quickly, one of the things I see is the kids settle on an answer rather than really thinking it through and searching further. They grab the first thing that comes up that looks kind of right, and they run with it. And often it takes them in the wrong direction. Even when you're using these tools, you have to have the patience to sort through what it is you're looking at. And maybe, as you said, the most important thing is you have to know what you're looking for. You have to frame your search correctly, because you can dive right in and get a ton of junk and grab the first thing there, and you could be miles off the mark. So that's, it's a tool if you use it patiently. just like the old, reader's guide and things like that were tools for us. You can get frustrated if things don't come quickly, but in order to do it right, sometimes you have to pause, reflect, and take your time.
And I think that's going to be more challenging in the future, and especially, your children will end up having teachers that were very embraced with technology in the future. So it's, I know I see it with my granddaughter, who's, in some accelerated classes in the 9th grade in a different town. But even she says sometimes she always feels so hurried because everyone thinks she can be able to get it done right now. And she finds that a pressure. Fortunately, in my prejudice, she happens to be a child that likes to read. And everything has to be done so quickly nowadays. Sometimes she feels that, I don't know, she's almost being cheated a little bit. So, well, those are actually wonderful thoughts to share. Now let's consider our second question. Have we, in education and the culture as a whole, gone too far with our determination to embrace programs and standards that place too many mandates on our curricula, forcing us to teach to the test? Nick, start us off.
From personal experience, I'm kind of, although it's the cheap way out, I'm kind of in the middle of this, because I actually like the idea of an SAT or an SAT, because it's a nationwide thing, and it's not necessarily the school that's teaching you to do it. They're not teaching to the SAT because they're kind of separated. It's something you have to do on your own time to study for that. But then, so I kind of like that idea of a standardized test, because you have to have at least one idea of a standardized test for everyone that can take that when they're trying the college process and everything. But then again, once you actually get into class, there's examples of AP classes. A lot of times they're too strict to the point. They don't really allow for a rant or something that you can learn a lot from, sometimes more than the actual class lesson. And then I think Mr. Seymour always has great insight from his previous lawyer experiences, and he goes not necessarily off the curriculum guideline, but for a little bit he'll teach us about something that maybe wasn't in the daily planner, and I think that's necessary, and that's it teaches you things that you're going to have to know for life and on-hand experiences. I think that's important. You have to have a little bit of leeway to stray away from the curriculum guideline, and that's why in schools I think standardized tests can also be a negative thing.
So, are you suggesting that by having that flexibility, as you've experienced with Mr. Seymour, that it helps you intellectually to be a more adaptable person?
Yeah, exactly.
And that becomes crucial, especially since there are many occasions in life where you basically have to think on your feet and use the knowledge you possess to engage whatever it is you have to engage and resolve whatever it is you have to resolve. Anyone else have some reflection on these thoughts?
I do. I have to disagree. I think definitely in AP classes, I think teachers do teach to the test. I'm in an AP class with only 5 students, and my teacher definitely teaches to that AP test. The intelligent students in my class do ask questions that she says, oh, they're not on this AP test, and she will not go over that material. She'll stick to what's on the AP test, and that's what she goes over. And I feel that that limits what we're able to learn. I would like to learn other things that aren't on the AP test. I know taking AP psychology, there's so many other things that you could learn that aren't tested on the AP test. And even in UConn tests and the SATs, there's so many other things that could be tested or just taught that aren't on the test. I feel as though some students are being cheated who really want to learn that material, because some kids are just taking classes to get the credit, just pass the test, and the teachers are trying to get them through it. And I just feel that some students are being cheated because they're being taught to the test and not being taught to learn.
So as teachers, if we're facilitating all of that, we're even confining the growth of your thought process even more. As teachers, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll say about, talk briefly about the AP course I do teach. I think there is a little bit of freedom for me to, go off in the direction I go off in, but I'm constantly looking at the calendar and the sample test to make sure that I'm covering this. And for example, like today we had a test, and the tests are drawn from sample tests. So I know that you're used to the format, used to the type of questions, and I've got to go back to those guides to make sure I'm hitting this, and this. So in that sense, it's limiting, but there are other things we can do about it. The other thing about AP tests, all tests in particular, but AP tests as well, is that in one sense it's a measure of a teacher's success, because we get that data at the end of the year. And if I get the data at the end of the year and everybody in my class gets a 2, then I'm out of that classroom. So that there's a reason why teachers are going to teach you the test. Yes, they want you to do well, but they also it's a mark of how well they're doing. And is it unfair? Yeah, it might be unfair. And do you have to teach the test? I guess in AP you have to. I guess that's the bargain you make, that in exchange for getting the AP, credit on your transcript and getting the AP and getting the points in the AP tests in the spring, you've got to put up with the AP curriculum. And it is a shame, because I think in your calculus course there's a lot of different ways you can go. I think in this government course we could spend months on single topics, but we can't. I mean, that's the trade-off we make. You want to do it, we want to play by these rules, and we got to play by these rules. You want the college credit, we got to do it this way. I have to teach it this way, you have to learn it that way. It's not the ideal way to learn, but this is what we have, because we're measured, not only are we measured within this building, not only are you measured against your classmates, but we as a school are measured against other schools. Look how well we do. We do pretty well. Look, we do better percentage-wise than some other schools. But we're constantly being measured, and that's just AP. I mean, to me, that's the easiest part of this. SAT, ACT, CAP, all the other stuff, that's much more difficult, because there are much more variables involved going on there.
Well, this puts us in kind of an ironic position where we make you folks go through this, and yet you're going on to a place where that's not going to happen. I don't know of any colleges that do that, even if it's a state university system. So, I don't know. To me, there seems some irony to that. Do you have any reflections on that?
Just with a couple weeks ago, I went for the AP training for Spanish, and seeing how I've never been a teacher of AP class, so I had no idea what to expect. However, I was able to see that it's not for Spanish, at least. It's not, you need to learn this topic, this topic, this topic. It's cumulative. So it's stuff that you've learned from Spanish 1 all the way through AP Spanish. So I'm in a different realm altogether, because mine is all application throughout all the levels. So with AP Spanish, it's completely different.
So you don't see it as limiting?
Right, absolutely.
All right, well, looking at an additional factor in our cultural and educational spectrum, have we misjudged our needs for the future by devoting ourselves to the idea that there should be a college for all? So, Katie, share your thoughts.
I think that most people do think that every student who goes to high school should go on to college. I feel that society puts a big pressure on students to go to college after high school. And students that go to a trade school or go to like a 2-year college just to get a degree in like engineering or firefighting, they're frowned upon. They aren't looked on as intelligent as people who go to a 4-year college or get a graduate degree or get a PhD. I think that I feel that college isn't for everyone. Personally, going through the college experience now, I've seen friends that aren't going to college. I have a lot of friends going to trade school. I have a lot of friends going to regular 4-year colleges. But seeing the differences that it has, it definitely has to fit your personality. It definitely has to fit whether how you did in high school, how you did on testing. I feel it's not for everyone.
Nick, what do you think as a student?
I would completely agree with her. I think it really depends on the person. It depends on what they want to do. If you don't want to do something, you're not going to strive to accomplish it. Personally, I wanted to, even different from a 2-year to a 4-year college, the difference between like a national university and a liberal arts university, I kind of wanted to go somewhere where I would get more, not necessarily, I don't know how to put it, but I would like more like roundabout education, where it touches base on just a couple, like, because I don't know what I want to do. It touches base on like a lot of different subjects. So I'll still be taking a science, I'll still be taking a history, instead of going to a specific university where I'm just going to study engineering. But then again, I completely understand when someone else is very, like, they're very devoted to engineering and they want to go to a 2-year school and just do that, and I completely understand that route that they want to take.
Yeah, whether it be an auto technician or something,
exactly.
Which is getting more and more sophisticated, you know, and we need bright people to fix our cars in the future. They're becoming more and more computerized, more and more electronic, and the days where I was able to work on a car are long gone, to say the least. As teachers, what are your thoughts?
I think it depends on the individual. I think there's a lot of pressure on students now to go on to a 4-year college. However, some students should just take the time to think, reflect upon their 4 years, and then decide, is it right for me or not, rather than put all the eggs in one basket, go to college and not do well. I mean, the only one you're hurting there is yourself and your checkbook.
Yeah. Now, but as a culture, do you think we've gone too astray in the context that you can almost make a student or a parent feel like we're not as good as if Nick doesn't go to Colgate or wherever?
One of the things that was in one of the articles you gave to us pointed out that, you know, we live in Fairfield County, where it seems like everybody goes to college, which is not really the case. But when you get around to the rest of the country, there are many places in America where the majority of people haven't gone to college. And there's a lot of pressure on kids to go to college now, and I think that many of them don't belong there. And the only thing that happens to these kids who go to these schools is they waste a couple years, they go in debt, and they come out with no skills, and they're angry, and they're near bankrupt, and they wonder what it was all about. And part of this enormous pressure to succeed in college has really severe consequences. When they're encouraged to take out loans, they're encouraged to stay in when they're really running the margin, they're encouraged to plow through with programs they're not interested in, or they're encouraged to stay in programs where there are no jobs. It's scary to realize that kids coming out with 24 years old are going to have $40,000, $50,000 in debt and no clear idea of where they're going to go. Now, there's nothing wrong with getting a liberal arts education. I stand by that, and as long as you're smart enough to know what you want to do with that education, there are plenty of kids who, as I said, go to school, drop out, sign more loans, and then they're stuck. And I think that's where we have to be careful. I mean, we read in the paper every day about how there's going to be a shortage of qualified workers because not enough kids have college degrees. Well, I don't know, does that mean we force more kids into college who aren't prepared for college and put them further in debt? Maybe there's another solution. But there are kids, who simply should take another path.
Well, those might be the paths you were suggesting with the tech schools. I mean, we're going to need mechanics who can maintain wind turbines to generate electricity, or maybe in the future we'll go with the well-developed submersible offshore turbines that were developed at the University of South Florida. We still need a whole venue of people on that end of the market. And right now there are almost 2.8 million jobs that are available, but the skilled worker for that job is not available. And I think we're going to have to do some, looking into ourselves in order to redirect our energies educationally and make people feel it's okay if you choose to go in a direction different from the supposed norm. So I know myself and my bias, I hope for that. Finally, we have become unrealistic with our commitment to believe that especially public schools, and particular public high schools, are obligated to be all things for all students. In these times of austerity, is it time for us to compromise about what we can do and do it well? Mr. Seymour, what do you think?
I come with a personal bias because I'm a product of a big comprehensive high school, and I consider Masuk to be one of those comprehensive high schools. And I think that if you're going to have a public school and you're going to require kids to come to public school, you have to be democratic about it, which means you have to have something for everybody. And that's in the ideal world, have music and art and technology education and business education along with the core curricula. That to me is the vision of a good comprehensive high school. And I will defend that forever. The problem I see is that there's so many external pressures now on boards of education and on, at the state level and the federal level, with decreasing sources of funding, that every district has to make some really, really tough choices. I would always choose to keep your comprehensive high school as democratic and as open as possible, with as many offerings as possible. One of the reasons I have issues with the schools that my daughters go to, but one of the good things about them is that they do have so many different offerings, not just curricular but extracurricular, and I think it's so important for a child in a big high school like this high school or some of the other high schools around here to find a place where they're comfortable, be it on a team, in a club, singing, acting, and a comprehensive high school can give you all those things. I know it costs money, but I think it's money well spent. I mean, we talk about cutting corners around here. I still think it's important to keep all our clubs, all our sports, all our activities going, because kids need a place to go where they could meet friends and be comfortable, because just going from class to class in a big high school like this is it's very easy to get lost.
Mrs. Sprindle?
I agree 100% with Jeff. I feel that here at Masuk there are plenty of offerings. There's something for everybody, but we can't cut anything because we want to give that opportunity to everybody here to take those courses that they're interested in, to participate in clubs and sports that they're interested in.
But being an antagonist here and thinking at it economically, there's a democratic ideal that we talk about here and the educational ideal, but you folks in your future will face this when tax dollars are coming out of your pockets for your property taxes, for your children and the children of other people. Can we do it? I mean, what do you see as the future? What has to happen if we're going to go along in agreement with Mr. Seymour and Mrs. Sprindle? What do we do? I mean, right now, it's been years since Masuk's had any auto shop. Other public schools in our area still sustain that. We've finally picked up robotics, right, and computer repair. So we're doing the best, but what happens when you look at the Treasury and there's the bottom? So as young people, thinking with a little projection, what is your gut feeling? What is your intuitive thought? Katie?
I think that as things only get more and more expensive as time goes on, that the school has to budget their money better than they do at the moment. Seeing that, I think all the courses and clubs that they offer here is great, but from a student's perspective, I feel as though the school does not budget their money as well as they could. I think that auto shop would be a great thing to offer. I know a ton of kids who would be interested in that course. I think that some of the things that they spend money on in the school are not as worthwhile as some of the things that they could spend money on. And I think that that has to be reevaluated as time goes on.
Should there be student input?
I feel as though student input would be helpful to the administrators that make those decisions, because it would give them ideas of how things could change and what would improve the school.
Nick?
Well, along with what Katie was saying, in the long run, if you thought about it, it could actually save, maybe not the school money, but that individual person a lot of money if there was the auto shop class, and I know we have a tech ed class, and even music, and each of these, the student is allowed to explore what they want, and then they are allowed to maybe find out what they want to do for the rest of their life, maybe a little earlier. And say if we had that auto tech class, a student could go there, discover that's really what they want to do, and they could save the $25,000 of going to a different college and instead just go to that 2-year tech school, and it would save them a lot of money. They wouldn't leave with their debt, and they'd already be doing what they want to do. So I think we have to find out what we're doing earlier, and I think that's important because the high school has to provide those opportunities for the students to find out what they want to do.
I mean, I can say quite candidly, I've been here so long that I can tell you Masuk once upon a time just didn't have auto shop and just didn't have woodworking. We actually had cabinetry and furniture. And we had National Honor Society students, one who went on to Harvard, who just loved on the side learning how to work with his hands, learning how to use lathes. And my daughter still has some furniture I bought that students had built back in the early 80s in her kitchen. A hutch, a entertainment unit. It's interesting for me because I've grown old in seeing so much change in 44 years. But I sometimes wonder if some of the trade-offs we've made, because as you were inferring, it's all a matter of how do we re-slice the pie. I mean, that becomes an issue. If the pie can't get bigger, the only thing you can do is re-slice it. And that brings us back to the community issue. Monroe is still struggling to bring in a larger base of business taxpayers. You know, we've lost Stevenson Lumber. We've lost what used to be Vitremont. But now we have, and if you go right down 111, as soon as you cross the Monroe border, you look what Trumbull has. It's very different. But we have a very low percentage of that. And so understandably, homeowners start to sometimes feel overburdened. And we can relate to that, but we have to come up with better dialogue, as you suggest. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see where the future shall fall. Well, before we close our discussion, allow me to ask if anyone has a final comment or a question they would like to bring to the table for consideration. Likewise, is there an idea anyone would like to share as a suggestion of what might be the most valuable change we could make to improve learning and performance in our public secondary system? Anyone have a reflective thought that they'd want to share as a last point on the table at all?
I think people should have faith that what the professionals in this building are doing is actually pretty productive, and we're getting good results, and we should be continued to allow to do that for the years to come.
So we need to really carefully continue to build and secure a foundation of trust between ourselves as professionals and the community at large. You agree with that?
Yeah.
Any ideas of what we could do better to secure that at all? Do you think we do enough outreach to the community and enough communication?
I think we do a lot, and I think I think we're going to do more with that capstone project because that's going to draw more people into the building, and I think that can only help because the more people who come in here and see what's going on, the better off it is.
Yeah, well, everybody's life is busy. There's no question about that. If America is anything, it's a population of people who are busy being busy being busy. And so hopefully, if once in a while we slow down and take a look, we might recognize that we actually have some very good things going. Upon that comment, I'm afraid we have to close our discussion. Allow me to thank our panelists on behalf of our audience and the Masuk Report. Our thanks to Mrs. Spurndle, Mr. Seymour, Katie, and Nick. It has been a pleasure to have you share your thoughts and ideas with us. Thanks to our audience for joining us. We hope you found the program to be of interest and value. Until our next broadcast, I'm Carl Bodner, wishing you well, and may you enjoy the forthcoming holidays.